Being longer. I have gathered, and these people have kindly donated their time. And thank you, Cooper, also for walking me through a lot of this. This is my first time kind of leading a session like this, so I appreciate the guidance. But these guys have all been in the industry for a long time, and we as Halifax owe them a lot. So we're just going to kind of walk through the last 30 years in Halifax and talk about the pubs, the bars, the scenes, and what was going on. I'm going to start off by letting everyone introduce themselves. So I'll just let you guys go down the panel and give a little background of who you are and what you're up to now.
Hello. I don't think I'm on, Doug.
You're kind of on.
Kind of on?
Oh, it's on.
Oh, it's on. I'm Jenner. If I haven't met any of you guys, come give me a high five after. I work and I'm part owner down at Bar Kismet on Agricola Street in the North End. I grew up in Lawrencetown, Eastern Shore, and I like bartending.
I'm Cooper. I know, again, most of you from various events. I am a bartender at Bar Kismet. I host a program called Monday School, last Monday of every month, where we kind of curate an environment of learning about spirits, and also Comp School, where we work and kind of hone our competition skills. Born and raised in Halifax, bartending for about 22 years in every imaginable environment. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here because I think this talk is going to be really beneficial to everybody. If not, just to get everyone together, have some drinks on a Sunday, enjoy each other's company.
My name is Sarah. I was born in Dartmouth, very proud. I started in this industry as a shooter girl slinging porn stars in the Dome. Long ago enough that there was still smoking room, and now I am the general manager here at Lot 6 and plenty of dabbling in between. I'm very excited to be here and very proud of Evan because he's very nervous, so please be kind to him.
I am.
Nervous people love being told.
I also like to tease Evan a lot, so it's my favorite part of my job.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Shane. I was born in St. John's, Newfoundland, and raised in Cole Harbour. When I was a little boy, my dad used to pay my grandfather in lamb's rum to look after me. So my entire life, I've literally just been dealing and trading with alcohol. I started bartending about 6 years ago, and I cooked for about 5 years before that. I dropped out of graduate school studying literature just to bartend because it was the most interesting thing, and I'm really excited to talk about the history of where we're come and where we're from, where we're going today.
Am I on? I don't know. I'll talk anyway. I'm an educator, so I know how to take a room over. My name is Brad McDonald. I'm from Halifax originally. I've worked all over the world. I've worked in corporate restaurant environments, boutique hotels, small standalones, and everything in between. And I've done every job in the restaurant business and food and beverage. Only one thing I haven't done. Anyone know what that one thing is I haven't done in the restaurant business?
Say a funny joke.
Whatever. Yeah. No guesses? I've done everything but own because I'm too smart for that. Sorry, Jenner.
Ouch.
Welcome, everybody.
Shots fired.
So if you guys just want to give a quick round of applause for everyone here because they are donating their time, and I really appreciate it. Also, everyone should do a little cheers to everyone here, to Sovereign, and to everyone here for education.
And also, and to you guys for taking time in your day to
thank you.
care enough to come out. I know it's gin, but you all have money, you can buy your own gin. But you came out, so, you know, this is for you too.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you. I also want to thank Nate, who's the sound guy today. He has generously donated a lot of his time and a lot of equipment to stream this. We're going to put this up on social media afterwards and stuff. So I don't know how many thousands of dollars of equipment is sitting around here, but he hooked it up this morning, so thank you. His company is the Atlantic Live Stream, so thank you. So to kind of set the scene here, I don't want to date anyone too bad. I don't think anyone was legal early 90s, were they?
No. Legal.
No.
Legal, okay. So I want to start with kind of Cooper and Brad, maybe, and I want to kind of set the scene and talk about when you guys became legal age and were drinking in bars in Halifax. What was going on in the 90s? Where were people drinking? What were people drinking? What were the hot strips?
What are you, 60?
I read it. I don't know.
You know, everyone know Evan is from Calgary. He really, we have to give him a little bit of slack here. He's like a blind juggler right now. So we'll just let
I'm just trying to learn.
I had to peer pressure him into applying for his first bar job.
It's true.
That's a very good point.
It is true.
He was bussing at the press gang.
Yep.
And
Terribly.
I told him.
Yeah.
I told him to apply for a job, and he
Yep.
did. So
Yeah.
kudos to Evan.
Thank you.
Brad.
So Brad, do you want to start? What was going on in the 90s?
No, Cooper's gonna go first. Go ahead, Cooper.
Or the hot strips.
Yeah, the hot strips.
The hot strips.
Yeah.
JJ's.
My young cousin's in the audience, so she might hear some stories that might alter her perception of her angelic cousin. So I started bartending in the summer of 1996, and the hot strip at the time, I don't know if I'm on now, you can hear me though.
You're good.
Was Spring Garden Road. So Spring Garden Road, as you know now, is mostly retail. There's I think Mexi's up there. Mustache still holds it down. But back then, that was where you went. The original El Mercado was on Spring Garden Road. The Thirsty Duck was at Spring Garden Road. And the Thirsty Duck at the time was known as the Thursday Duck because everyone got paid on Thursdays and everyone went to the Thirsty Duck. It was jammed the entire time. And that was my first bar job as a bar back in the summertime.
Where was the Thirsty Duck? Like where on Spring Garden was the Thirsty Duck?
It's where Mexi's is now.
Yeah.
So that was the original space. And Argyle, which is now the main strip, or sorry, the hot strip, was a ghost town. There's nothing down here. Like there was a sporting goods store where Dirty Nelly's is. And if Crusher's in the audience, so if I'm making a mistake, you jump in because you actually are older than me. Shoe shop, yeah. There's Cleves was where the shoe shop was. So it's kind of like switch. It was like Argyle was retail, and Spring Garden was food and beverage.
Cool.
And as far as what people were drinking, the wine list was white and red. For real. Yeah. That actually wasn't a printed wine list. It was just all out of a glass of white, or house white, house red. Keith's was king on tap. There were no microbreweries. There certainly weren't any local distilleries.
When did Propeller open?
Rum was white. I don't know when Propeller opened.
97.
Yeah, but even then, they weren't in popular bars, right? One of the first bars I worked, and this is kind of futuristic and yet completely stupid, because you might remember this, Crusher, is the Thirsty Duck in their genius bought this computer bar from a guy who designed it from Newfoundland, where it was about the size of 3 of these tables, and it was a series of buttons. So there were no bottles behind the bar. They were all downstairs. So if you want a rum and Coke, I'd press rum, Coke, and I'd put the glass underneath. And there were thousands of little spouts that would pour rum and Coke. If I wanted Caesar, press Caesar. Imagine how gross that is. Gin and tonic, blah, blah, blah. So that was bartending at Thirsty Duck, which is a super busy bar because there was no bartending. They just want to draft. I think what set it apart was its size. Halifax has always had a great reputation for live entertainment. It had a huge stage. It had the best bands in the city play, for whatever that means. And in the summertime, they had the busiest rooftop patio. And there was 2 bar backs hired, me and this other guy. And first day, I'm introduced to this other guy, and the owner said, okay, if I ask you who wants to work on the rooftop, you're both going to say, I do, but I can only take one of you, so we're going to flip a coin. Remember, it's the summertime. Flip the coin, I won the toss, I got to pick, I chose the rooftop, which is obviously the busiest part of the restaurant. The other guy got downstairs, which means he did nothing all summer long. And by the time the summer was over, he was gone. I've never heard of the guy since. But if I had lost the toss, I would have been downstairs. And who knows, right? So it was kind of like one of those moments where it really came down to that coin toss because I was upstairs with all the business and all the juice was. Got to know the bartenders, got to be around bartenders, and that's what sparked everything for me.
Cool. So after the Thirsty Duck, one of the biggest bars, I think, to start off a few cocktail or at least mixed drinks was the Velvet Olive, which I believe is where that white government building sits on Market Street now, across from Prince George, I think. Is that correct?
It's
There's like a dry cleaner.
no, it's a hair
It's a
restoration
hair
clinic.
salon.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say hair salon.
Yeah,
So
What?
I don't.
How do you know?
because actually I was trying to find parking, and that's why I wanted to park. Said how apropos that I parked in front of this joint. Before Velvet Olive was Velvet Olive, it was called the Market Street Cafe, right? And I applied there and I didn't get hired, so fuck those guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's now a hair restoration clinic.
So at the Velvet Olive, Brad, I know I asked you if you had knew Gord Hanna and Dave Mitten at that time.
Sure.
Did you ever go to the Velvet Olive?
Oh, I
well,
used to go all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
So I originally met Brad Denton, who's one of the owners, and
Yeah.
a close friend of mine.
I
up
saw
in,
him on the coast.
Oh,
So.
did you?
Yeah.
I used to hang out with those guys quite a bit when in my early days, going out to bars. So Brad, Dave, and Gord. But I think I firmed up my relationship with him in Toronto. That's where we kind of really started running in a tighter circle. But that was the first place where you go and you'd see somebody drinking, a real mixed drink and what they call martinis, whether it was a pink martini, whatever. It was the first place we really saw it. From there was certainly some spin-offs that happened from there. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
would you or anyone on the panel care to explain kind of what do you guys think Dave Mitten or Gord Hanna, what is their kind of role in the Halifax cocktail scene?
I think they brought a lot of personality to it. I think that was their key driver. Like, I've worked with Gord. I was Gordon's boss for 5 years, and one of the things that I love about Gord is that I can give him anything and say, here are the tools. Can you make this into something magical? And he could, because he had the personality and the gregariousness to have everyone follow along with him. So personality was huge for those guys. They didn't have like a deep skill set, and like when I think back to it, when it comes to like if I look around this room, I know that every single person in this room is a better bartender than I will ever be. But they had something different about them back then, and it was that personality. It was the ability to engage a room and engage conversation and fill the wood with people that wanted to be with one another, right? So that's kind of what I really experienced at the Velvet Olive. They were also, they built in some programming that was really interesting too, is where you can go and see live music that was appropriate to still have a conversation. It's you don't see that too often.
Cool.
And keep in mind too, just to jump in there.
Go ahead.
But before the Velvet Olive, everything was a pub or tavern or a nightclub. So what the Olive did was they made bartenders the reason to go, whereas before they were just felicitators to drink, right? So you went to the Seahorse, you went to the Split Crow because you wanted to have a bunch of beers and go see a band. You went to the Velvet Olive because they also introduced flaring, for better or worse.
Yeah.
So
I wasn't going to go there, but go ahead.
yeah, well they did, but that was the thing. That was part of the show. Is they did flaring and they did like the martini tower when you pour the one on top and all that kind of stuff, and like the shots that all like domino down. Like they did that, which now seems kind of novelty and dumb, right? But back then, no one had ever seen it, right? So it was a huge kind of draw. And they had different music, and they had like drum circles, and it was like all pillows and very like, it didn't look anything like Halifax looked like, right? So that was the draw. That was the big separation. They had more than one kind of wine. They had an open kitchen. Everything about it visually and tactile was completely different, which set the stage for everything else. And Brad's right, they were personalities. They were like, you went to go see what they were up to, right? Whereas no one went to see their favorite guy to pour them a keys,
Right.
right? So
Shane,
I wasn't going to bring this up till later. I have it written down right here. Did you guys, this is an honest question. Did you two ever consider being like, fuck yeah, I want to do flair? Like, I want to be that guy. No, I'm not like dissing it because I understand there's a place for it and this was like a big thing. Cocktail came out around that time. I listened to the soundtrack this morning.
Did you really? Wow, you really got into it.
Don't ask why.
Okay.
But I'm like curious. I was driving, being like, I wonder if those guys seriously contemplate, like, you know what? I gotta learn to juggle. I gotta figure this out.
I always knew it was really gauche, and I just wanted to have my drink. So fuck off, right?
Yeah.
But I will say that I did find like there's some nuances that you can do within it that I found really cool. So grabbing a bottle or having my martini shaker, shaking it, giving it a little spin before I pop it. I would do a little bit of that, but that's as far as I go. Like it'd have to be a functional sort of part of my service instead of it being all about me. Because at the end of the day, I want a drink in your hand and to be satisfied.
Yeah.
See, when you ask,
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you ask me that to me is like kind of like a micro question of like a macro answer. And so if I was to say like the macro answer for me is like Halifax now and has always in certain ways followed different trends, right? And so like the flair trend was certainly alive in many cities across North America, and Halifax, as we know now, certainly per capita has some of the best bartenders in the country. But at the same time, we're just like a small part of like this like massive push across the country, you know? And so a lot of that flair stuff would have been like here in like a smaller fashion, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I was just, this is jumping a little ahead of Evan's schedule of events, but it's requested a lot when you work in a cabaret bar, like working in Cheers. When I worked at Cheers, the occasional time I sold my soul and worked in the Dome, like, you know, those bars, they want it. Like, and they're paying, you know, $140 for 6 Jager bombs, and they're gonna tip 60 on it. So it's like, is it worth your time, money? Because in that realm, you're not focused on necessarily the quality of a cocktail that you're providing. So I think that the flair concept depends on what wood you're standing behind and who your clientele is, because you don't want to annoy, like, you know, if I saw somebody doing it here, I'd be like, well, you know, it's really loud and a little obnoxious and it's not really the clientele. But when the clientele dictates and requests that from you, you know, our jobs as bartenders is kind of to give them what they're requesting within the proper means. And so I think that in the time when mixed drinks and cocktails and everything was just coming about, people were looking for something more, something to add excitement to it, which is probably why. But it really depends on what you, as a bartender, want to give to your clientele.
And that's what I was kind of trying to get at, was that moment, the mid to late 90s in Halifax, was a huge moment across like North America for the growth of bar and the bartender and bar culture and industry and stuff like that too, right? And it was a major cocktail shift, and we kind of picked up on it a little bit. But in general too, that seems to be a huge shift, because a lot of bars opened up in like the mid 90s in Halifax too, right? Reflections opened up in like 96, and Marquee opened up in like 98, and there was a lot of the transition going on in the Dome and all the other stuff too. So that was just a huge shift across in general, right?
And not to beat a dead horse, but show of hands quick, how many people still get people coming to their bars or meeting them outside of your workplace and being like, I'm a bartender for a living, and they're like, so you must know how to flip bottles and do flair. Like, it's still, honestly, it's still a question. I got it last week. But it's still like the belief of, you know,
My students ask me every week,
But
can
we're
you do
still-
something flair? I'm like, absolutely not.
But it's become, we're stepping into this amazing era where bartending is a career, full time. It's no longer what's your real job or what do you actually do, like, and it's because of you guys in this room, all of you, and all of us, and like the people who have blazed that trail before us. Like, you know, I'm proud to say that as a career, I've chosen with a kinesiology degree to be a bartender.
Hey, I'm glad to hear you say that, because from an educational standpoint, I teach at Nova Scotia Community College in tourism and culinary, and we talk a lot about what we do as a trade and how it's not recognized as a trade. So if I was to do the 2-year culinary management diploma, I'm on track to become a red sealed chef, right? It's a trade, it's certified, it's something that's recognized internationally. Whereas for the bartenders and bartending culture and food and beverage just in general, we don't really have that certification, right? And it discounts the effort that we put into and the passion that we put into our industry. And I think we're kind of at a tipping point right now where that shift needs to happen. I don't have the answers, but I can tell you that it's conversation that's currently happening right now. How do we make that transition from warm bodies to professionals in our industry?
I've always, first of all, anyone can tell me the mantra of Monday School? Daryl? Bartending is an apprenticeship trade.
Very nice. I keep skipping Mondays, but I'm in school.
The second we stop learning from each other, the same second we cease to be bartenders. But I'm happy that I always say to people, especially chefs, I'm happy that bartenders don't have a cookie cutter curriculum to follow, a box to check, and a diploma in the mail. Because some of the dumbest people I know are chefs. Some of the most socially awkward people I know are chefs. But they can cook. And some of the smartest, most diverse, most dynamic, most nuanced people I know are bartenders. Because all of the education, all of our personal growth, personally or professionally, which usually blends into one, is all on us. If you want to learn about classics, you go learn about classics. You can learn from someone else who's older than you, who knows more, sure. But unless you take that time, that initiative to learn yourself, you're not going to learn. A chef goes to culinary school, sits at his desk, does his work, passes the exam. I'm a chef. We don't have that luxury, and I don't want that luxury, because you're a bartender. Being a bartender means you're always working at being a bartender. There's no end game, right? There's no graduation class. And for chefs to be like, I've got my red seal, I don't care. You complain about cooking all the time, right? Bartenders, the great ones, love to make drinks, right? We make drinks.
I would say the same about chefs, though, too, right?
Yeah, I think Cooper
Well,
is being very rude right now.
So now that we've
I spent 5 years in the kitchen.
all right. So now that we've bashed chefs a little bit,
Yeah. To be
Next
continued.
and I've let this go on maybe a little too long. I want to move out of the '90s and out of chefs into the 2000s, and I think there's a bar, the Bitter End, that probably should be discussed in terms of the history of the cocktail in Halifax.
Serving millions of martinis since 2001.
So, Sarah, where do out of the 5 of you, I think 3 of you have worked at the Bitter End in different capacities.
Just me and Shane that does it?
Yeah.
Did you?
Shane did.
No, Shane did. Yeah.
Cook there.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I didn't bartend.
Who else worked there?
I bartended there.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, where do you guys where do you guys see the Bitter End standing in terms of its spot in history for the cocktail?
I want to tell you, can I jump in right away?
Please.
So I bartended, I was working with the Hard Rock Group in Ottawa, and I came, and I wanted to work at the Bitter End. I knew it when I moved back from Ottawa to Halifax. This is where I wanted to work. It's 2002. I'm like, okay, that's it. I hounded the guy, the owner at the time. I'm not sure if he's still the owner, but yeah.
Still the owner.
Still the owner? Good, yeah. Hounded him to work there, and just kind of kept dropping in. Hey, how's it going? You hire and hire. It was the middle of winter. He's like, no, fuck off. I'm not hiring. It's fucking February. But it just kept showing up. Anyway, it was the best thing I ever did. And I'll just tell one story. The cocktail list was a fucking nightmare, and I don't know if it still is or not.
Still is.
Okay, cool, great. They had blenders at the time. I'm like, throw those fucking blenders out, right?
Still do.
Oh God. So, but what we had was we had a group of people coming in through the doors that were really interested in trying something different. They didn't want a rum and coke, and they didn't want an Olin's. They may want that in between, but they were willing to try something different. And I remember there's a bartender, I think he's back in the city, he might be bartending over in Dartmouth. His name is Ryan O'Hearn. And there was Ryan, yeah. So Ryan's just a lovely, lovely man. And I remember working with him on one side of the bar. When I first started, we only had the one side, but they expanded. And he brought in limes and mint. And I was like, what the fuck are you going to do with limes and mint? Right? 2003. And he goes, I'm going to make a mojito. And I'm like, I want to punch you right now. Like, what is that? It just sounds weird, right? And so anyway, he made me a mojito. And if you know Ryan, he's very articulate with his words. So he made me a mojito, and I was like, holy crap, like that really kind of blew my mind. So even though I had been in the industry for probably 4 or 5 years at the time, and I knew a lot about a bunch of shitty cocktails, that was the first time where I went, wow, I can use fresh product to make something really brilliant.
What year was that?
2003.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know, Ryan, you grew up in Cole Harbour, which is great because I think most of this panel is made up of Cole Harbour people. So there's certainly something in the water there.
Thank you.
Is that it? Yeah.
Or not in the water.
But what I think is really amazing about the bitter end is like, say what you want. I mean, for me, I don't turn my nose down at any style of bartending or drink making. There's a place for everything. I mean, I think everyone can listen to a country song and appreciate it for what it is. And like every style of drink making or bar is kind of like that same thing, right? Like you can just understand and enjoy for what it is. Obviously now, most of us in Halifax are extremely privileged to be using fresh ingredients and juicing fresh and making syrups, and everything is, you know, picked in your backyard and foraged, and that's awesome. But still, there was a huge part when none of that happened, and everyone poured out plastic jugs and just shook it. And at the same time, people had fun, they enjoyed it, and I think that's what the bitter end did more than anything, was push like cocktail culture and scene. I mean, one of my kind of biggest frustrations is when everything's a martini, and so their whole list is a martini. You know, martini is a classic cocktail consisting of a couple specific ingredients, and it's not necessarily, you know, gummy worm and blue curacao, but their martini list at the bitter end was all of that. And for me personally, that was my first introduction to bars, because I answered a ad for a dishwasher in 2006 to wash dishes at a restaurant. I thought it was a restaurant. So I went there and I was like, maybe I can get free meals while I go to school. So I started washing dishes at the bitter end. And I had no idea that it was this crazy, almost nightclub vibe, and people were like dancing on the bars, and like they were making so many cocktails. And the first cocktail I personally ever made was at a Christmas party there, and they said, hey, come behind the bar, and I stood behind the bar, and I had this great idea, because all the drinks were so colorful, everything was like pink and blue and yellow and electric, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to take this pink, I'm going to take this yellow, I'm going to take this blue, and it's like, all these guys do it so easy, and I mixed it all up, and I poured it out, and it was like dirty brown water. And I was told that I would never be allowed to make a drink there. And honestly, that stuck with me, and I felt like inadequate that I couldn't bartend, so I was in the kitchen. And some of my friends went out and started like serving, and I was like, no, but I had moved on from there to the bar behind that. But to witness it for the first hand, that culture, I was like 20 years old, 19 years old, and to see these crazy people, I couldn't even imagine being a bartender, because I thought that's what you did all the time, was these crazy people. There's also, at that moment, a lot of cocaine too, and so people were like...
So was Argyle the hot strip
Yeah.
at that point?
It was becoming the hot strip.
Yeah.
But I think, sorry, you go ahead.
That's okay.
No, you're a Bitter Hen alum, so you go.
I worked at the bitter end for like 3-ish years. I'm looking at my ex-co-bartender, Tim. Tim and I worked on the same side of the bar every Monday night for 150 weeks. And we probably shook 1 million cocktails just on those Monday nights. Because the rest of the week wasn't, it started to decline as the culture of cocktails became bigger in the city, because this was about 10 years after Brad, and what people knew as cocktailing or martinis was the bitter end, because we were the #1 cocktail shaker bar, I guess is the best way to use it. We were one of the only bars in the city that actually used a cocktail shaker. But the whole menu was cocktails. Shane's correct. And so it was funny when I came here with a 4-year break in between, and women were still coming to the bar and asking for a sour apple martini, or they'd ask for an apple martini. And, you know, you'd make them something with like apple brandy and, you know, put it, and they're like, no, where's my gummy worm? And I'm like, this is still a thing? Like, that was 6 years ago.
Is it still a thing?
It
Can
is
you get
still
that
a
there?
thing. Oh yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So
because
awesome.
the difference in the 7 years between coming on to work here and starting at the bitter end, my garnish tray at the bitter end, you filled it with olives, gummy worms, cherries, and limes and lemons. Those were all you did.
Were the olives beside the gummy worms?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Same plastic
there was
tray.
definitely some cross-contamination going on there.
Olives, cherries, maraschino cherries, and gummy worms was what you put in this box behind you. And that's all you needed for all of the cocktails. All of them only got those garnishes. And now, I have such an appreciation because I don't work behind the bar anymore, but when I'm like, it's 5 to 6 and we're opening the atrium and Kyle and Evan are like, we don't have our garnishes ready. I think back to how easy it was for me to do it back then versus now they have 15 deli containers and 6 different tools to make sure that they have the garnishes that they need and picked mint and picked basil and everything done in advance, and they don't complain about it. And so I think back how often I complained about how much work it was back then versus what you guys do now. And sometimes I do have to take a step back when I am mad at them that they're not ready to open because
Frequently.
if you'd arrive on time, maybe you'd be ready.
That's part of it too.
But there has been such a swing, and the point that I'm trying to make here is that I still think that we have a long way to go with encouraging our clientele to appreciate that. Because I still think people expect to get things as fast as they used to when I was pouring, vodka, melon, and amaretto at the same time, and then a jug that had lemon and lime mixed already pre-mixed, and I could shake 8 of them at the same time and get them out to the table. It's not that way anymore. These things take time and they take care, and so I'm anxious for the city to, and I think that we're moving in the right direction, don't get me wrong, but I'm anxious for the city to have a full swing and come back on board.
I think sorry, go ahead. I just want to say that you make some amazing points there. And one thing that I sort of want to scaffold on is to make that transition is that you need to be content experts, right? So when you're making that drink that is really complex, it's about being able to speak to it while you do it instead of being enveloped in your own little world. Because I've been there as a bartender. You're so busy, you just get sucked into however many chits you have on in front of you to pump through. And it's about building a skill set where you can work within what you're doing, whether it's the guest in front of you or you're working service bar, being able to do that, but also be able to articulate what you're doing. It takes time. It takes time to make a good drink. I understand that, but it also takes the time disappears when you can have a conversation about it while you're doing it. That's all I have to say about that.
Can I just make one quick point?
Yes.
As a non-bitter end person, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Crusher, but the bitter end, as you know it now, started off only on the left side, right?
Yeah.
So for me, for Steve, for other bartenders at the time who were working in pubs, no one thought it was going to succeed. We thought, because the important thing too, psychologically, culturally in the city, bitter was the first, even though Velvet Olive were already doing cocktails, the bitter end was the first bar to call themselves a martini bar, which was a big sticking the neck out moment, right? Because the entire menu was martinis, and no one really knew what a martini was. And Mike Lee capitalized on that and been like, they're not actually going to ask for a martini. We'll just put it in a martini glass. And it got so busy, the entire city was wrong, that they knocked out the wall and doubled their size within, I think, a year.
I was working there when they knocked the wall through. Yeah.
And the same thing happened with Mosaic, but it's every time this historical stuck in the mud city thinks, it's a rum and coke beer city, the cocktail culture proves it wrong, right? Every step of the way.
Fuck yeah.
This room is proof of that, eh? Oh my God.
So-
I was just
No,
gonna
go
say, the big thing is though, again, because Halifax is such a specific city in terms of its size and what bars can succeed and not succeed and etc. At that moment, there was some proper style of bartending going on. I mean, in the early 2000s, late 90s, there was a lot of real proper return to what we understand now is the way to bartend, being that classic influenced bartender. And there was, right next door to the bitter end, as that was pouring electric purple Kool-Aid cocktails, actually I don't want to talk about some of the cocktail names because they're too vulgar to even mention. I feel uncomfortable, but yeah. But there was a gentleman next door to it at Mosaic, was Cooper, who was actually doing from scratch, real deal cocktails. And Halifax at the time was so involved in one kind of style of drink making that they couldn't even accept that there was something else even going on. And I'll never forget when I would walk into my dishwashing shifts and there would be this dude who was dressed literally like no one I've ever seen. Like, this guy's wearing a track and field shirt right now, and he's just in his slacks, comfortable, dad Sunday, want to watch football look. It's great. But he used to wear 3-piece suits, and he had the style, and his hair, as it is now, was just perfect. It was slicked back, with little curls. You know, he had the 3-piece with the bow tie, and he had the polished shoes, smoking cigarettes outside like this. And I thought he was like the coolest person I'd ever seen in my life. But I couldn't understand why his bar wasn't busy.
Have you guys ever?
I could never understand.
Have you ever YouTubed Cooper?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that one thing that the Bitter End did do right, though, was teach people how to lounge.
Yeah. Okay.
Cocaine.
Yeah. Well, in my years, it was people enjoying cocktails, but not like rage dance floor, drinking, partying, live music, all this stuff. It was like a chill vibe. No one got, obliterated, and if they did, except for like me and Tim behind the bar. No, I'm joking. It taught people how to like calmly consume throughout the week instead of just always it having to be like chugging pints and listening to live music or that sort of thing. And I wish that culture helped Mosaic more, and what happened to Mosaic didn't happen. But I do remember, he's not here today, or he'd be sitting up here with us, but Jeff Van Horn and I went to high school together, and our birthdays, his is January 3rd and mine's January 4th. And so every year we'd go out drinking together. And I remember the first time he took me to Mosaic, and Cooper was bartending, and I was like this shooter girl at the Dome, but I was like, I'm gonna fucking do this. Like, I'm gonna be that person behind the bar. Like, I love this. And so I was only, I think it was my 20th birthday, but I remember thinking, like, even though it's still not here, it impacted a lot of people in a very big way. And it was a Tuesday night. It was Industry Tuesday at Mosaic. And I thought I was like super fucking cool because I was industry now. And I was like, Cooper's making me this awesome. I asked for a gin gimlet and you giggled at me. And you said, you don't have to say that it's gin. Yeah. And I was like, okay. Yeah, so I remember that very distinctly.
You don't have to say it.
Yeah, I was like, I'll have a gin gimlet. And he's like, it's just a gimlet.
So I'm going to steal Evan's thunder for a sec. I had heard lore of Cooper. Growing up in Lawrencetown, I spent a lot of time with a guy named Ben Amodi, who was a really good friend of mine. And he was bar backing at Mosaic and like spitting, all these amazing things about Cooper and who this guy was and what he was doing. I had never met Cooper. I met Cooper a few years later when the drawing room opened for the first time. But I had never been to Mosaic. I couldn't afford to go into Halifax in the first place because I was living in Lawrencetown. So I want to know where, if you're growing up in this city in Halifax where none of this stuff has happened before you guys started doing it, where did you draw your inspiration? What was the kind of the tipping point where you were like, fuck that, I don't want to do that, I want to do something new, and I don't care, I just want to do what I want to do. Like,
there's no apps on your phone. There was no
YouTube.
Yeah.
You couldn't jump on Amazon and order a cocktail book.
Yes.
Come on. Like, I want to know where, like, did you take a trip? Did you meet somebody who was like, you know what, you got to come to New York for the weekend and see what these guys are doing? Like,
so I lived in Australia for 2 years. That's a short answer. I was in Australia when I was 21 to 23, and that's where I worked in an insane nightclub, but we went out drinking at cocktail bars in Sydney, and they were fresh juices, fresh herbs, house bitters, house syrups, the whole nine. Spirit knowledge was way higher than I thought a bartender would even have be required. And around that time, I bought my first cocktail book, and the only kind of cocktail book going was something you should all have. Is Craft of the Cocktail, Dale DeGroff's. And
pretty good.
For a year, I made every single drink in that book 100 times over, until it looked like the picture, until it tasted like I thought it's supposed to taste. The other thing too, which was really difficult for me, is I had, for the first couple years before Jeff kind of came into my life, I had no one to bounce ideas off. I had no one to be like, is this balanced? I had no one to be like, am I shaking this right? Am I stirring this right? Because there was no YouTube.
No.
There was no YouTube. There was no books. I had no mentor. I was going off of what I could remember I saw in Sydney, what I tasted in Australia, how those guys worked. And because Sydney is this weird, if anyone's been there, you can jump in and agree or not, but it's this weird city it's full of nightclubs, but refined culture. So yes, they had to make cocktails, but they made them extremely fast because they had that dynamic. When I got home and I saw the bitter end, I was like, this isn't going to work in Halifax. I know this city. It's rum and cokes and keys. And then it did, and I thought, long story short, I was working for the guys who own the 7 Wine Bar now, which is Stubborn Goat. And I was telling them, like, can I start doing cocktails behind the bar here? And like, no, we're a wine bar. But I was kind of sneaking in bartender's choices where I could. And making gin martinis with Fino sherry instead of vermouth, right? Something that should still blow anyone away. Because sherry and gin are peas and carrots. But they said, we're gonna open up this bar. We're basically gonna build it for you. Will you do cocktails down there? 100% I will. And then it was a long, exhausting conversation with the help of my Superman who came to my rescue.
I've been
Brad.
waiting to jump in for so friggin' long.
Yeah. So they're like, we're gonna let you do all the cocktails you want to do. You do like carte blanche, do what you want. Build the bar, buy the inventory, make it happen. We're 100% behind you. But they didn't want to use fresh juice. So for a year, 2 years, I worked my way around that by only doing stirred classics. So, like, fine, you won't use fresh juice, then there won't be any juice. Then it's going to be old fashions, Manhattans, Old Pals, Negronis. By the way, no one ordered Negronis back then because no one knew what Campari was, and it was a weird thing. It was red. So
Nobody knew who Gary
because it
Regan
was red, and here's the other weird psychological thing. Because it was red, they assumed it was sweet because the bitter end ruined colors for everybody. So
Red sourpuss.
yeah, red sourpuss. So I circumvented their rules by just making stirred classics. So that became the thing. Is you could come and get a for real old fashioned. We branded our own cherries, and then Brad came. And I'll let you jump in. I'm just going to set you up. I'm going to tee it up nice and high for you. Brad moved back home from managing the Drake Hotel, which anyone should go to in Toronto for years. And Brad and I went to high school together, so we already had a really good relationship. And came to Mosaic as our GM, and I kind of saw my problem, saw how I was hemmed in. And, well, you can take it from here, but I mean, he basically set the stage of setting a pick, setting a screen on the ownership to be like, just let him do it. We can justify the cost of taking the juice from an actual lime and add it to the cost of the cocktail. Economically, it'll work, and we'll be doing something no one else does. But you can take it from there, and that changed everything.
Absolutely. So, like, it's funny. I want to tell a story about 7. So I was bartending at 7 just over a year before I left for Toronto. My wife went to med school in Toronto, so I went up there to put her through it. I guess, kind of, still paying it off. But I was doing the same thing. I was working behind the wood at 7. I was their head bartender there, and I was circumventing them at every turn. Making fresh, ordering a little extra fresh lime, fresh lemon, making all these drinks, and they just want the Lipton premix jug stuff. But I would circumvent all the time. It's funny. But anyway, full circle. I went to Toronto, and I was working with the Drake Hotel for 4 years. And when I arrived at the Drake, they were going through that same struggle where it's like, oh, it's too cost prohibitive to move away from a premix to go to a fresh. I'm like, that's bullshit. I'm going to show you how. And I started sourcing. I'm like, where can I source fresh juices? Found this juicing company. Great. They did mildly pasteurized, but still, at least it would keep for a few days, right? Because you couldn't fresh squeeze at that point in time, especially in a place where you're doing, $12 to $14 million a year, and 85% of it is in booze. There's some things, but I proved the ownership group wrong. I was like, here's how I'm going to go about it. Here's how we're going to price it, And we became literally the cocktail bar in Toronto, period. We were the only ones being interviewed, being recognized by you name the magazine in Toronto at that point in time. Left there shortly thereafter and came to Halifax. And it would have been, 2008? And Cooper was, you could just see him just like this, like, please get these handcuffs off me. I'm like, all right, no problem. And I did. I put that pick up. I'm like, we're going to do it. We're going to do it this way. We're going to charge appropriately. We're going to cost things out. Tell me what your percentage is, ownership group. No problem. Great. If it's a $16 cocktail, well, then fuck it. It's going to be $16. Boom, there you go. And people paid for it. And it was awesome and it was delicious. And it just gave you free reign for us to go and start making our own house-made bitters. You know, I remember making orgeat syrup with you the first time. I was like, I'm going to show you how to make orgeat. And I was like, hey, check this out. You're like, fuck, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? And then you were just like, at that point in time, like, he had way more skill and talent, ability than I will ever have. What I did was I had the skill, talent, ability to convince owners to actually let us go ahead and do it. And like, my whole career and my success in my career, and I don't talk about myself very often, but my success in this career is based on giving people with more skill, talent, and ability the tools to go ahead and flourish.
You're the Miles Davis.
What a guy. Let's give it up. Let's give it up.
So, in kind of the late 2000s.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, of course.
What sort of role or inhibiting factors did the NSLC essentially, like, what was the selection like in the NSLC in 2008? Was there any things that were holding you guys back? Bishop's opened in 2003, I found out. So,
Yeah.
They're like definitely importing a lot of intricate spirits for us right now, and the liquor store selection has grown like tenfold in the last 5 years. But
I always tell this story. A few of you have heard it before. It was I mean, the selection was pretty small, right?
Yeah.
That's the short answer. It was pretty small, and you know, I won't go on a big rant about the SLC. Promise.
I've heard them all.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But we didn't need a whole lot either, right? Because no one was, like, we were at the very beginning of trying to introduce classically crafted or even properly crafted cocktails. So we just needed the basics. We needed a really good whiskey, vermouth, some really good gin, ice, fresh garnishes, fresh produce. But I remember when they got in Lillet Blanc,
yeah,
right?
Jeff was talking about it.
Yeah. Jeff and I called each other and were like, they've got Lillet. And we went down, he bought a case for Taboo. That's probably coming up on the sheet.
That's coming up next.
It's coming up next. And I bought a case for Mosaic. And the two of us made like 1,000 Vespers.
Corpse survivors.
And that's kind of the cool thing of how it went, right? Because I think what this session today kind of shows, I mean, because a lot of bartenders in this bar can't imagine a world where Lillet was like a diamond in the rough, or
It's like Rittenhouse.
or Rittenhouse.
Rittenhouse showed up in the SLC and collected dust, so they
Yeah.
discontinued it.
And they mispriced it, and I bought it all, and then
It's
they
like
they did the
$37
mistake,
or
and they put
something.
You guys see Kyle's shirt today?
Kyle's
did.
repping.
Kyle's wearing Rittenhouse right now.
But it was kind of cool because somehow in the NSLC's ineptitude of inability to bring in cool stuff, it was like this slow trickle, which was probably appropriate.
Yeah.
Because if they had the whole world to offer, we would have bought it, and it would have been this onslaught in the public, and that would have been overwhelming, and they would have regressed. But it was like, here's Lillet, here's some Lillet cocktails. Here's a bonded whiskey, here's some bonded whiskey cocktails. Here's Seville Orange Bitters that we made last night. Here's what you do with that. So it was like a slow growth, which it had to be.
Yeah.
Now, no, I'm not going to do it. I was going to go on a little rant.
All right, so touching on Taboo, is Taboo still not?
Taboo's still open.
Okay. Would anyone on this panel right now order a fresh juice cocktail from Taboo right now?
I would.
Probably. Yeah?
Who's bartending there?
Yeah, it depends. But so I want to talk about, I wish Jeff Van Horn is in Boston right now, so he couldn't be here. But I think Jeff in Taboo is part of this lineage.
Big time.
Yeah.
I can speak to it
Yes.
a little bit because at the time that Jeff was taking me to see Cooper at Mosaic, he went from the Thirsty Duck to Taboo, and that was right around the time that I stopped working at the bitter end, or not at the bitter end, at the Dome. But even then, it wasn't cocktailing as we know it now, because Jeff was very smart about it. When they brought him on to curate the original cocktail list, he introduced it very slowly. So it was, you know, a raspberry vodka and soda, but it had fresh raspberries and mint in it. It wasn't this like 6-part cocktail that had to be curated, you know, exactly for you. And at the time, it was brilliant because Taboo was shut from the rest of the Liquor Dome. It was the same price of cover, but you couldn't get to and from. Everyone was like, I was wearing a different shitty Le Chateau party dress out every night that I was going there, because that's what you did. You dressed up. You got dressed up to have what you thought were these really fancy cocktails and a very chill, like, dance floor vibe. It wasn't what Taboo is known as today. And I don't know if there's a lot of people in this room who were, I will say, lucky enough to actually experience Taboo as its original intention.
How about when you could smoke in it when it was the attic? That was even better.
Yeah, it was like rock band.
I used to sneak up there with my shooter tray and
So
smoke cigarettes.
I want to throw 2 names out there too. Jeff mentioned to me that his mentors at Taboo. I tried to find these people online. I couldn't find them. Where are they? Michael Thompson and
Yeah.
Blake Smith, 2 Australian bartenders. Does
Yeah.
anyone on the panel know them?
I had such a crush on Michael Thompson. So tall and
Yeah.
handsome.
So that was
blonde.
funny. When I read that, I was surprised that he named them as mentors, because I looked at them more as his support group, because the problem that Jeff had was Taboo had like 11 bartenders. They had 4 bars, and it was a big space, and he was this one guy making Corpse Survivors. He was this one guy, because everyone else would be like,
Why?
why am I doing it? I need to make tips. I'm just going to pump out vodka sodas and Jager bombs until 4 in the morning. And I'm not going to bother with this stuff. And anyone who comes, they just send them to Jeff anyway. Now, Michael and Sam were good bartenders, but they didn't bartend as much as he did. And Jeff was already kind of a known personality, so yeah, I would more consider them his support system than mentors, really.
And it was hard for Jeff because he was supplementing, you know, he was working in Taboo and not making as much money as he should have been, and supplementing by working shifts in the Dome because that's what he believed in. He'd work MA back on Sunday nights when the Dome was still open on Sundays for industry night, doing the antithesis of what he wanted to push forward because he had to, because he still wanted to try and make Taboo work. And I think that speaks volumes about Jeff's dedication to the idea of pushing this culture forward.
It's fucking G.
So Jenner, when I want to go to like 2010, 2011, when you helped open the drawing room, or was that 2009?
What I think it's important also to mention that at that time when that whole thing was starting to happen, that the Bertozzi group was flipping Bicycle Thief,
Yes.
and that became
Yes.
a beast
Yeah.
for turning out like volume bartenders. I thought I saw Hopper come in.
He was sitting in the back. I think he's
Like,
gone now.
you think about it, Hopper, Boyle, Bradbury, and JVH, those guys fucking dominated. They were winning everything, pumping out all the drinks. Like, that kind of was happening around the same time as I got a job at the Henry House bussing tables because I wanted to surf all day. I was managing a surf shop in Lawrencetown, and I don't know if any of you guys know Scotty Sharon. He's one of my close buds. Zach Bush, Luke Godin, Miles Baldwin. All those guys were talking about this magical place called the Henry House where they could work 5 to midnight and surf all day and make good money. And I was like, well, I want to do that. Can you get me a job? They weren't hiring, so I ended up bussing at the Henry House and then serving a couple tables here and there. Scotty hurt himself or called in sick for work one night, and they physically pushed me behind the bar. I didn't want to do it because I was terrified because I had watched these guys work this busy pub. I don't know if you guys have been in the basement, but it gets busy. It gets juicy down there. So I worked it's very juicy.
Juicy's a good word.
I worked the bar that night and instantly fell in love with it. The social aspect that exists with bartending, I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. The interactions, the people, it like fuels your fire all night. So I worked the busy shifts in that's where I didn't meet Shane there. Shane and I grew up together. I don't know if you guys knew that. Our junior highs were very close. Our high schools were mortal enemies. But we knew each other. We played a lot of sports against each other. But I was working in the Henry House. Shane showed up and was cooking there. And they wanted to renovate the third floor to open an extension of the pub to control their overflow. And somebody had suggested that they put cocktails on the menu. At this point, like 2 weeks prior, somebody ordered a martini, and I didn't know what vermouth was. That was kind of where I was like just absorbing all this stuff. And because I ended up working a lot of the busy shifts in the Henry House, they asked me if I'd be interested in working in the drawing room, and I told them straight up, I know shit all about cocktails. I don't know anything. I don't know how to make a martini. I knew how to make a badass Caesar with Clamato juice and like, you know, that kind of stuff. But so they're like, all right, well, we'll pay for you to go to Toronto to take a bartending course, because there was no bartending courses here at that time. It's, as far as I know, that.
I thought your bartending course was coming in to see Cooper and I.
No.
No?
I only came in a couple times.
Yeah, I remember you asking like a million questions one night. It was
Yeah.
like a snowstorm. You were coming to get Ben.
Yeah.
And it was like crazy. And we stayed for like a good hour and a half. And you were
After
like,
close.
what about, and how about, it was awesome.
And so they packed me up on a plane, and I went to Toronto and took this course. And the first night after the course was done, I walked up to the instructor and I said, where's the best cocktail bar in the city? And he said, go to Bar Chef. And I walked in, and my brain, I left my brain at the door. I just like melted out of my head, because I had no idea that you could toast nutmeg and throw it in your bourbon and then make your old fashioned, and like the juices and the egg whites, and I was enamored. Anyway, I stayed past close at Bar Chef, and those guys got me right frigged up, and I missed the class the next morning. And anyway, I spent the week in Toronto and learned as much as I could, came back, and I bought the Savoy cocktail book. That was my first book. And I read it cover to cover 400 times. I still have it. It's got tabs on all
Everyone
the.
should have the Savoy.
I color coded all my tabs based on base spirit cocktail. So gin was green, absinthe was blue, vodka was yellow, like rum was orange, and I went through the whole book and coded the whole thing, and they let me have free reign on the cocktail menu, and the support of like the Allsops. Jess was amazing, and that whole team, like they were like, just fucking run with it. So that kind of started.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, so I moved to the city in 2013. I just finished at St. FX, and I moved here. And I was a terrible employee at the press gang, shucking oysters. And on your last weekend before you went to Toronto for a year, 2 years, I found the password to Noble. So that trip down at Noble changed my life, because that was the night that, you said pass in a resume to the Middle Spoon. So where do you see jumping from the drawing room to the Middle Spoon and Noble as kind of a turn in cocktails for the city? Because when I moved here, it was Noble, Middle Spoon, and Jeff at the Bicycle Thief, who were like just kind of pumping out.
Can I say one thing before that, though?
Yes.
Because this kind of leads into it. Because I got to witness, like, it's pretty cool for me to be here speaking to you as a bartender now, but to see all of this growth from, like, behind the scenes. Because when the bitter end was doing that, I was washing dishes and cooking. And then I ended up getting a job at the Henry House, and I got to see firsthand from behind the scenes all this stuff, how it happened. So when I was just, sending nachos out and flipping burgers at the Henry House, I got to see Jenner, who, was an old friend of mine from growing up. I had no idea the people that worked at the Henry House. I had no idea what it was. All I knew was it was a historic building, and it was like this kind of old school pub. So that's why I was attracted to it, the history and the stone. And at that time, they started to get interested in his cocktails, which is when Jenner opened up the drawing room. And I had no idea, because what's really interesting about that particular space is that the basement is an old pub. This place has been in operation for, it was a home, it's been restaurants for most of the 20th century, it's been so many different things, and so there's a lot of history there. But upstairs, they completely renovated this space, and it's probably, I always consider it to be the most beautiful room in Halifax. And if you've never been in the drawing room, just go up and take a peek, because I do believe that it's like the single most impressive room in the city. Everything comes from another part of the world, Scotland, Ireland, the chandeliers are from the same age of a house from California that he went down and bought, because it was the exact same year that the Henry House was built. So they went down to California just to get those or something like that, right? Like every piece is specific. France. The bar was built and shipped over from Britain, I think, right? Is that correct? Yeah, like the whole thing was put together and it's incredible. And then they paid some guy minimum wage just to use a nail gun and build it,
Kyle.
and that's how it got done. Yeah. And so anyway, it was a beautiful space. But I would go up and I would see this gentleman again, just in that like Cooper Dapper mode, completely like enamored. Because you think of bartenders at this point. As far as cocktails go in the city, after Cooper had left and went to Vancouver, there was this void. Jeff was interested in doing some things, but there was no one classic cocktail designated individual, and Jenner was the guy. And so it's funny for me because, you know, we were old friends and I would go up, but at this time it was just like, again, this beautifully dressed man mixing these drinks, cigar smoke, and everything was going on. They were using dry ice, they were using smoking guns, and you know, you all drink. My first drink I ordered from a bar was a screwdriver because I didn't know what a cocktail was. It was warm orange juice and vodka, and then I'm seeing this guy literally infusing bourbon with cigars, and I realized at that moment that there was this massive shift, and Jenner led that. And then after the drawing room, he left the drawing room, I went up there, and it was the most intimidating thing of my entire life. Yeah.
That answered a whole half page of questions. Okay. I'm serious. I had that whole.
The first time I met Cooper face to face was the first week that we were open in the drawing room, and he came and sat at my bar, and I swear to God, I shit myself. I looked up and I was like, because it was him, Benny, and one other person, Joe Donnelly, and I remember the round. It was a mint julep. It was a Manhattan, and I don't remember the third one. I think it was a Sazerac.
It was a Sazerac.
It was a Sazerac. And I remember the round. And think about how many chits you've pulled out of a printer in 10 years, 12 years. I remember the round. And I was like, fuck these guys. Like, come on, man. We're a week in.
Hey, Tess?
Yeah, because I mean, I've been in the Henry House. I've had peculiars. I've had the pot pies and all that stuff. And then you hear, hey, do you hear they're doing cocktails in the Henry House and like the upstairs? I'm like, what? That bullshit. We're going down there. So
They totally vibed me. Yeah. All three of them. They're just
all
like,
right, let's go. Well, like we had like bar backs. You watch my bar. You watch my bar. We'll be back in an hour and a half. And as we're walking down, we're like, all right, what are we gonna get? Like, all right, well, I'm gonna get a julep because he's not crushing any ice. And see if he's, you know, because you want to see like, do you have fresh mint? Do you have a julep tin? Can you crush ice? And then the Sazerac's your classic, like how you're gonna get the absinthe in there. And then I remember walking up, and you had your back turned.
yeah.
And there's 3 seats on the left. I remember like it was yesterday, because I was like, this is tiny. This is a tiny little joint, but super intimate, really cool.
Yeah.
And the progression, you know, of bitter end to mosaic, the natural progression was the drawing room, right? It was a more intimate experience. And you turned around, and even if you like dumped a little bit, your poker face is perfect because just kind of like, hey guys.
And I knew Ben. Ben and I had grown up surfing, and so I was super comfortable with Ben, and so I kind of like focused my comfort on him while not really paying attention to the other two. And they're like, "This is Cooper," and I'm like shaking as I like reach out to shake his hand. I remember it, and they're like, "We'll have this, this, this," and I was like, "Fuck these guys, man."
Yeah. And the competitive part of us were like, we felt we were the best cocktail bar in the city. Part of us knew like for us to succeed there needs to be more cocktail bars, but we also still wanted to be the best. So I remember Joey and I, we talked about this afterwards. There was a part of us were like, we wanted the drinks to suck, right? We wanted us to still be the best when we left that place, right? And I remember we walked out and I was like, my julep was pretty good.
You never told me that.
I've held it in all these years. And he was like, yeah, my Sazerac was like perfectly balanced, like perfectly diluted. And then it was like, okay, this is it. This is the thing now. Like, this is like, it's now unstoppable. It's only going to get bigger and better. And
It is unstoppable. You
Yeah.
guys.
So I spent 2 years, year and a half. I was at the Henry House for about 2.5 years-ish. A year of that I was in the drawing room, and I only worked in the drawing room Thursday, Friday, Saturday?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I worked in the pub the rest of the nights. Basically the same kind of thing. We weren't making crazy money out there, so I made my money in the pub.
Yeah.
I hustled my ass off every night. So my time kind of came to an end there, and I was without a job for 3 weeks. I contemplated going to paramedic school. I looked at going back to university. I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Walking down Barrington Street, saw an ad in the window for the Middle Spoon. And I was like, well, this could be cool. I wonder if they have a bartender yet. So I reached out to Lacey and Kieran, and they interviewed me in Starbucks on Barrington Street. And
Yeah, that sounds about right.
let me give you a little context here. I sit down for the interview. Kieran and Lacey are happily married. I sit down for the interview. Kieran leans over the table. He goes, "You make a move on my wife, I'll fucking kill you." And I was like, nice to meet you too. So that's how the interview started. They didn't have a bartender, so I kind of jumped. They were gracious enough to let me run the program. And when we did our staff training, I was hand juicing lemons and limes in a construction site. We had a plywood bar for our staff training, and we were going through the cocktails. I worked at the Spoon. They gave me creative freedom to do whatever the hell I wanted, which was amazing. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't have the support of Kieran and Lacey and how much they believed in me and the team that kind of formed around me at Spoon. And I used to walk by this dingy, dark room in the basement every night to take out the garbage, and I offhandishly mentioned it to Kieran one night because I had heard lore of these bars in New York where you have to have a password or a secret door. Like Milk and Honey had opened, PDT was just getting off the ground, Employees Only was a big thing. Like those were kind of like, and then Death & Co. And those guys were like really pushing the forefront for cocktails. And I said, you know, it'd be cool if we opened a bar downstairs. And he was like, what? I was like, you know, like the speakeasies in New York and in London. And he kind of like looked at me, and I could tell the wheels were turning. And we kind of parted ways. I went home, he went home. He called me the next morning, and he was like, let's fucking do it. He spent the whole night like looking them up and researching them, and Lacey and Kieran were like, let's do it. Like, let's see how little we can spend on opening this amazing little spot, and we'll make cocktails, and we'll create this atmosphere. And it was kind of like walking into a comfort zone. And I wanted it to be a place where people could walk in and totally forget everything that was outside of that place. That was what I wanted, and I just wanted to make good drinks. Like, we wanted to not allow people to have cell phones down there. That was a big thing. But it became kind of this like fun. I think the reason why Noble, besides the amazing staff and the people that run it, is a special place, is that you get to put this hat on and not become a different person, but it's like an extension of yourself. You walk in there and you can kind of like let go of everything because nobody's watching you. Nobody's like checking who's down there. Nobody's, I don't know, posting it on Instagram and like all this kind of stuff, which wasn't even a thing back then, but I think it was really neat. Yeah, it was an escape, but not an escape room, you know, like it was something different, and it was something new. And a lot of people, I remember when Shane came down there for the first time, and Field Guide was just starting to become an idea. And Dan and Kaylee, that was the first time I met them. They used to come to Noble a lot, and it was this idea that we kind of ran with, and everybody believed in it. And I don't know, I'm like getting a little worked up. It was fucking cool, you know. My two brothers and I spent a lot of hours down there, a lot, and I took a hand sander to like vibrate every single concrete panel you see on the front of that bar. It took us hours. I think it trimmed a few years off my life and fucked up my lungs, but we loved it, and it was like our little hideout. And I don't know. I hope that it inspired a lot of you guys to like the bars that have opened recently and things like that. Like that was one of the first of its kind.
Yeah. That bar changed my life for sure.
Well,
yeah.
For those of you who I haven't met before, I lost my brother just about 2 years ago, and watching Jenner cry is making me cry because my absolute favorite memory of my brother is the fact that they had a piano downstairs and would just let anyone play it. And Matt was a classically trained piano player. And we went down there, it was my two older brothers and myself, just the three of us, and Matt played the piano for like 3 hours to the point where people were tipping him, thinking that he worked there. And like meanwhile, my older brother and I were just like getting hammered at the bar, and Matt's like, I'm stone sober, like I've just been playing the piano. But people were like loving it because it had this, Jenner is so correct, and like it's important to like affirm your belief in that that's what it was because the moment you walked in there, you just felt like you could order whatever you wanted, do whatever you wanted, be wherever you needed to be in that moment, but also get to experience, you know, going back to what Brad said about putting personality behind a bar, and that's why you go there. That's why I went there, was to see Jenner or like Evan or Anne-Marie.
Anne-Marie.
You know, I went there because I knew who was going to be behind the bar and who was going to be, you know, providing me that service, not just a vending machine who's flicking rum and Coke and putting it in front of me.
I think the middle spoon was the tip of the iceberg, and as soon as we kind of like dove deeper, then this whole world opened up, and people believed in it. And I'm not trying to sound too corny, really. If anybody knows, if you guys know me, I'm a very straightforward dude, but you know, it was magical. It really kind of like. And that's, I think, when it really
Still
hit.
is.
It is, but it's when it really hit where I was like, this stuff is possible in Halifax.
I think the biggest thing to remember from that too is that it's a passion piece, right? I mean, all of us bartend for a specific reason, but I'll tell you, when I was down at the Middle Spoon all the time, it wasn't busy. It was me at the bar, and Jenner was making beer cocktails on Tuesdays, and you got to drink the rest of your beer afterwards. Like, that was like something that had never been happening in Halifax before, and it wasn't busy, and yet like they were pushing the culture forward. And so pretty much like the Middle Spoon and Noble has transformed cocktails in Halifax, and they did it by like suffering through a lot of time where it wasn't a popular thing, just like Mosaic was too, right? I mean, they did it because they believed in it, and believing in it is made what now is possible.
I'm just waiting until Evan asks me about women in the industry so I can hype Lacey up so hard, but I'll wait for that.
That'll come. But so continue off kind of the magic of these craft cocktail bars that emerged. Jenny, you touched on briefly Kaylee and Dan. So Shane, you were at the drawing room, and then how did Field Guide emerge with you, Kaylee and Dan?
Well, that to me is like one of the, because they just celebrated their 5-year anniversary past month. Bartender here now that worked there and have worked there, so it's still a huge part of the scene. But 5 years ago, what you have to understand is that there wasn't really a lot of truly dedicated like cocktail scenes. Like, there wasn't many cocktail bars that were just there to be like, we just want to really make cool cocktails, right? I mean, you had the Middle Spoon, you had Noble, there was certainly a couple other things that was going on. I worked at the drawing room. I started pouring pints in the Henry House. I got the opportunity to go up, and then I'll never forget the first day that I actually was told, this is called a julep strainer, this is a Hawthorne strainer, this is a French set of mixing tins, and I knew at that moment that I had a lot of work to do. Predominantly, I'm a self-taught bartender because I just got all of these books and read about all of these cocktails and tried to do that. And at the time, because I was so interested in it, I really kept to myself. I didn't know anything about bartending. I didn't know anything about bartenders, but I was just interested in it. And Jeff put on a night. If you guys can help me remember what his night was called, but it was at the
Art Gallery, Nova Scotia.
What?
Art,
Oh, yeah.
edible.
Oh, it was at
with George.
Untitled Eats.
Untitled,
Eats,
yeah.
So
Untitled
Untitled
Eats
Eats was a cocktail pop-up well before its time at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, which is an
It
incredible
was like a lunch
space.
place in
And I went there, I went there just to have these cocktails, and Jeff was making, bourbon cocktails, and I was like, I love bourbon, and I would ask him a question. He was like, who's this kid that's asking questions? And he was so kind to come up and give me advice and just talk to me about it. And so when I got the opportunity to work at the drawing room, I worked there for 8 months. Field Guide was just starting to get started, and Jeff was the consultant on the project with Kaylee and Dan. Kaylee and Dan took a lot of influence from bars in Toronto when the Drake was popular, when the Black Cliff was popular, and so all of this kind of transcended here, and they wanted to do something like that.
Because Kaylee and Dan are from Toronto, right?
No, Kaylee's from here, but Dan is from Ontario.
Okay.
And so Kaylee and Dan were so motivated to do it, and they looked at Jeff, who at the time was the leading cocktail industry expert in Halifax, brought him on board, and then they said, what do we do? There's no bartenders. There's literally no real bartenders in Halifax, but they knew that I might be interested, and so they interested in real classic cocktails. And Jeff approached me and asked if I would do it, and I said sure. And so I'd only been bartending, actually bartending, for 8 months when Field Guide opened, and it blew my mind because I literally hadn't spent any time interacting with people and learning the levels of intoxication and how much people can drink and learning all of those fine tunes that make bartenders bartenders how to talk to people, how to interact with them. I knew nothing, and yet here we are opening up this brand new cocktail bar. The Coast was taking photos of it, and it was just like this huge thing. And all of a sudden, it just like took off.
Yeah. So
Also part of the growth of the North End, which is the whole thing itself.
Can I interrupt just for 2 seconds?
Yep.
Because Shane and Jenner just reminded me of something that I think is really important to mention, because I doubt that many of you know who he is. But I had the luxury of working for a guy named George Kaptanakis. He owns the R&B right now. He used to work at Seven. He owned Untitled Eats down in the Art Gallery and worked with Jeff a lot. I 100% would not be sitting where I am right now if it wasn't for George. I worked at the R&B for 2 years in between the Dome and the Bitter End, and it was my favorite job I've ever had, save for Lot 6. I loved working for him. I unfortunately had to leave because I was moving for the summer, but he taught me so much, and he pushed forward this culture of like appreciating alcohol in a really cool and chill way. And maybe it wasn't cocktail culture, but he was just like, we used to have these nights at the RMU, and it was like a nightclub, and he'd like block out all the windows, and I would be bartending, and it would be like insanity. And at the time, I'd only ever served shooters. I was like serving Caesars, and he was teaching me how to make martinis and pour pints, and teaching me about like color coordination and how to line up my bar, and how like the ketchup had to be away from the sugar, but the pepper had to be in front of the salt, because then like if the salt's out, 2 white things are showing, like all these little nuances that you'd never think of if you didn't have someone like perpetuating that behavior in you. And so I just, for those of you who don't know him, he has done a lot for the people who work in the industry here in Halifax.
Cool. So I just want to ask briefly too, like for 2 people that were maybe a little weren't actively bartending in Halifax around Middle Spoon time, Mint Noble and Field Guide, so to Cooper and Brad. So Brad, as an educator in Halifax, in the hospitality industry, did the teaching kind of change a little bit? Did cocktails become a conversation in class? And also then to Cooper, did you guys notice in Vancouver at Hawksworth, did Halifax kind of become on the map for you guys?
The
Brad?
conversation absolutely changed. My first years with Nova Scotia Community College, it was pretty standard. I want to bartend, I want to do this, but then it became like you would have students coming in the last 2, 3, 4 years where they're coming with like some education behind them. Can you tell me about bitters? Like, who are you? You're 18, 19, 20 years old. Are you talking about bitters right off the hop? Like, great. Whereas before it was just like, what's a rum? You know, how was rum made? And we still have those questions, and I'll go down the rabbit hole with them as a part of the curriculum. But certainly things have changed tremendously just in the past 6 years alone. Yeah,
Cool.
from picturing 6 years ago to picturing where I am in 2018, and the spectrum of knowledge that comes through the door,
Cool.
it's changed
Cool.
tremendously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, Cooper, was Halifax starting to become a little blip on the map out in Vancouver, which arguably probably was, you can attest this, maybe the most far along in terms of cocktails in Canada?
Yeah, and at that point, Cooper was operating one of the best bar programs in the country.
Yes.
Easily.
With my boss.
I left here. I was headhunted by Hawksworth Restaurant to work at their bar, and Mosaic closed due to nightmarish ownership and management. And I went out there in 2011, 2010, 2011. And
With Jeff, right?
pardon me?
With Jeff? Jeff told me that you guys were on Tales on
Tailgate
Tour.
cocktail.
Yeah, so what happened was Tales the Cocktail, everyone's heard of it. If you don't, you need to know. There's the main site in New Orleans every summer, but they also do a traveling show. And one year they went to Vancouver, and I would read about Tales the Cocktail in a Buy magazine. I'm like, ooh, wouldn't that be great one day if I could go? But a little guy like me from Halifax would never get to go. And then they went to Vancouver, and they submitted applications for apprenticeship program. And so I applied, and back then it was like you had to like write a cocktail menu, and you had to like give a essay on what you thought about spirits culture. Like it was really intense. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who had never done that. And so Jeff and I both applied. I got in, Jeff didn't. Jeff was like on the short list, and then some guy dropped out, which moved Jeff up into the trip. So Jeff owes a big thank you to that guy, because it really kind of changed our careers. So we went out to Vancouver. We're part of the apprentice team. which basically means you're the support staff. You're making all the cocktails for all the seminars. So it's lesson 101 in how to batch, essentially, and how to work your ass off from 6 a.m. till 2 a.m. Professionally. And while I was there, of all the meet and greets, this guy comes up to me and says, would you ever consider moving out here? And I was like, well, I went to university in BC. I've kind of checked that box. Not really. It's not really for me. I'm perfectly happy where I am. I love Mosaic. It's built for me. It's my joint. And I said, we're really working on something special, and we're like basically hand-picking our bar team, and we'd love to be a part of it because we've got all these different guys, but we need an X factor that no one knows about. If you know a little thing about Vancouver, it's like everyone's in each other's pockets, right? And they need someone, they wanted someone where would show up in town and no one knew anything about it and just be like this mystery personality and I could do whatever I want. And I was like, thanks, but no thanks. And then he kept persisting and I said, fine, I'll take the interview. So I interviewed with Chef Hawksworth. I don't know if you've ever seen this guy. He's a celebrity chef. He's the impetus for most of my comments about chefs earlier. I was making a generalization, not all cooks. I work with a very intelligent, very bright cook at Kismet, chef at Kismet, pardon me. Don't tell him I said that.
Fired.
But I sat down with him and he like put me on over the barrel and really grilled me on how would I run a restaurant, how would I run a bar, like if it was mine, what would I do? And it was a 2.5-hour interview. Anyone been in a 2.5-hour interview for a bar job? One person. So I left, figured whatever, I'm totally happy again, got home, and here's where the universe, I don't know if I believe in Kismet or not, or karma, but it's one of those things, like the coin toss when I was going to be a bar back upstairs or downstairs. The morning of whatever day it was, I get a call from Vancouver saying, the job's yours if you want it. We'll fly you out. That afternoon, I got called into the head office of Mosaic to be told Mosaic was going to close. But they're like, don't worry, we're going to take care of you. We've got other properties. You've been good to us, we'll be good to you. And I was like, I'm actually good. I'm going to be okay. Closed Mosaic down 2 weeks later. 4 days after that, I packed up 2 suitcases and moved to Vancouver. Now, at that time, Vancouver was where every bartender in the city was flocking, or in the country was flocking to. It was at the forefront of cocktail culture because of its proximity to Seattle. And it doesn't align itself with any part of Canada at all. It aligns itself with much more Pacific Northwest, LA, Portland, and Seattle. So the best cocktails and the best bartenders were being made in Vancouver, so no, Halifax wasn't on the radar in that sense. But I would come home for Christmas, or I would come home for summer vacation, and I'd see the Old Guide's opening. What's up with this? It's on Gottingen, right? You know, which is a whole other Spirit Sessions.
Spirit Sessions hot strips.
Hot strips.
Yeah. But then it was like, okay, things are happening, and like it's not make believe. It's like legit. They're actually legit cocktails and legit bartenders. It's actually happening. And then you know, places like Obladi opens up, and all these places matter. People still will open up. Once you see the transition of people caring what they put in their body, what they're willing to pay for, that's the difference, right? It's the same as going from house white to house red to here's our list of reds by the glass, here's our list of reds by the bottle. Once people started caring, smart bartenders and bar owners like Kaylee and Dan took advantage of that. Like, you care, let us give you a selection of what to care about.
Cool.
So it slowly became a blip. And now I talk to my friends in Vancouver, and they were 100% aware because of guys like Will, Thomas, Keegan, bartenders in this room that are making national waves. You're like, shit, balance of powers starting to flip. Once he moved home, once Jenner moves home, I come home, it's like, wait, you've got this cushy job in Vancouver running this huge program. Why would you leave that to go to Halifax?
Yeah, we took care of the city when you were gone. Don't worry.
Yeah.
100%. So, yes, it became more of a blip. It became an absolute fighting, power. And now, I think nationally, everyone's taking notice, 100%.
Cool. So we are kind of running a little short on time. So I do want to cover kind of two things kind of quickly that should take entire session, or a lot of different things. But I want to talk about Lot 6 briefly and kind of Jeff's vision and Shane's vision when you guys opened Lot 6 and kind of its spot in history now of kind of one of the more high volume cocktail bars in the city. So I don't know, Shane and Sarah, if you guys want to briefly touch
I'll
on that.
just say, like, it's specifically all Jeff, because, you know, when Field Guide opened up, I was working really well with Kaylee and Dan. Jeff was like the consultant on it, but he always had a million different ideas. And so I was 100% in at Field Guide, working 5 to 6 days a week with those guys, and we were building up this like cocktail program and gaining momentum and learning. And again, I was learning and growing as a person. Being self-taught, I never really had like a true mentor. Jeff certainly was the individual that I got to learn the most from, and I would follow around. And when he decided that he wanted to open up Lot 6, who am I to like leave this? Like, I was on salary, I had this comfortable job, and we were at the best place we possibly could be. And I was just like, why would I leave that? And I was like, I need to learn and grow. And Jeff had this idea to come here. Lot 6 was born because Jeff one night walked into a bar. Jeff walked into the press gang, and a good friend of ours was working at the bar downstairs there. And so Lincoln was working, and Jeff was there, and Lincoln was like, man, like, you know, our boss has got this like new location, I want to show you it. And so Lincoln took Jeff up through the back, walked him up through that dank little back room, and came in here, and this was a complete construction zone, literally torn up. And in all of that rubble and rock and garbage, Jeff had this vision. And so Jeff approached the owners and essentially was like, hi, he wrote him a letter. Hi, my name is Jeff Van Horn. Here is what I think is a good idea. And they said, sure, let's do it together. And so Jeff was able to bring his vision to life, and he wanted to do cocktails in a big way. And so again, when I came to work here, I had only ever worked by myself on a bar. At every bar I worked at, I was individual. There might have been a second bartender or a bar back, but you would open by yourself, close by yourself, make all your syrups by yourself, juice by yourself, everything. When I came here, it was a team, and that was Jeff's big vision, was to bring community together. And so when we came here, and all the bartenders, Elia, who's one of the OG, Mac is one of the original people that's here as well, what was it, 4+ years ago we came together, and Jeff brought us through this massive training process. When Lot 6 opened, you did over a month and a half of training, but that's also because construction was behind. But that was because Jeff pushed all these lessons. Here's all your lessons on vermouth and sherries and gins and classes and education. And so Jeff wanted to bring education, community, and all these people together to work together. And that was something that I want to be a part of. And I think that's an extension of what we all have now, because I think the most important thing, if you look at our cocktail community in Halifax, we all know each other, we all support each other, we all learn from each other, and that started with really Jeff putting us all in this room together, for me personally anyway.
Cool. And Sarah, so starting, as you said, a shooter girl, or in cabarets and whatnot, where do you, as GM now of Lot 6, where do you find the spot kind of sits in cocktail history for Halifax?
I think that my favorite part about Lot 6 is that it kind of brings together every bar and restaurant I've ever worked in, all in one establishment, because it encompasses like what I got to learn at the bitter end when it comes to creating a cocktail. We won't say a martini, but no matter the ingredients, it was a cocktail, versus the quantity position of like high volume and pushing it out, but also brings me back to what I was saying about working for George, the fine-tooth comb that you need to roll out over everything. Just because we aren't as intimate as some of the other places that do what we do as well, it just means that we need to be even more careful with how many we're pushing out and making sure that everything that goes out isn't sacrificed because we're doing 6 of them at the same time instead of just 1. And it's funny because one of my best friends, Kyle, and I started here at the same time, and we both started as a bartender. So I was bartending the front bar for about a month and a half until I was approached to take over the GM position. But I did training with someone who had been my friend for almost 10 years, Jeff, and Shane, who I'd known since we were 5. My mom taught him religious education. Like, we all grew up in the same neighborhood. It's hilarious when you look at the plethora of people that pulled from our community. But I was nervous. I was like shaking behind the bar looking at Jeff, who, like I said, I'd gone to Mosaic with. But it's what I like about everyone who works at Lot 6 is that there's an element of humility to everything that we do. Because, like Cooper said, once you stop learning, you stop growing, you're no longer a bartender. And I will say 1,000 times over that, yes, I know how to program Aloha, and I'm killer at the paperwork, but I do not know a lick compared to everyone who's sitting up here with me. So it's always about recognizing your strengths versus your weaknesses, and I think that the team mentality is really important here at Lot 6 because you recognize what you can do and what you can't, and no one seeks to climb any faster than they know they can. So I think that what Lot 6 does is helps the more intimate places around us introducing people to cocktail culture, but still in an environment that they're kind of familiar with, like loud and busy and lots of people, and then they can decide that, you know, next week they want to go somewhere and just sit at the bar and have a classic cocktail and learn a little bit more. So I think that Lot 6 is like that, it's like at the center of the bridge from cabaret to intimacy, so that you can experience something that you are, like I said, familiar with, but also enjoy things that you are not familiar with.
And then Jenner, we do have to kind of,
Close up.
I have to start bartending in 20 minutes.
You work at 4, not at 3.
You're right. All right. So, but I wanted to, I want to touch on Kismet, which is now becoming a cornerstone to cocktails in the bar industry here. It also is probably the farthest out of the kind of the center of the city, and as in that amazing Coast article that about Annie, you guys wanted to make it kind of the cool old spot, not the cool new spot. Why did you two decide to come back to Halifax? Was it just the waves and surfing, or was it just what was going on here?
I don't know. I think I don't want to overstep and say I think I can relate to Cooper a little bit. I worked at Bar Raval. I met Mike. Mike, to backtrack a little bit, Mike did the Tales on Tour in Vancouver. Mike Webster, and I met Mike in New Orleans the following year. We both capped together. That was my first introduction to Mike. We both got stranded in New Orleans for a night because our flight got canceled, and we became very, very good friends. We're still very good friends. And I left Toronto. I left Halifax in 2013. Moved to Toronto to work with Diageo after World Class, and it just wasn't for me. The brand side of things, I didn't like the show that you had to put on in the face, and it just wasn't for me. So I quit my job. I had no idea what I was going to do, and Mike and Robin, good fellow, asked me if I wanted to get a coffee, told me they were opening Raval, and if I wanted to be a part of the opening team. So I worked there for a year and a half. They offered me the bar manager position, and I said no. I wasn't super happy in Toronto just because I wanted to slow down a little bit. Raval, we were working 3 p.m. to 4 a.m. I did that 4 or 5 nights a week, and then pepper in there a prep or a day shift starting at 8 a.m. It really fucks with your internal clock, and you start running out of juice or out of steam. And so I wanted to change. I wanted to change the lifestyle. I wanted to slow down a little bit. And Annie and I met at Raval, and honestly, we haven't spent very many nights apart since. And we used to scheme up all these ideas of how we were going to move back to Halifax and do something we wanted to do. And originally, I was so sick of bartending and cocktails that I wanted to open a little tiny diner with no drinks. That was like the goal originally. I just couldn't, and we took that idea to a few banks, and they laughed us out the door. Fast forward, you know, we had a lot of support and a lot of amazing people around us, and a lot of support from the community, and the team that we have is amazing. You know, in order to have an amazing facility or an amazing space, you need an amazing team, and I think we just wanted to open something that was approachable. I think we wanted to kind of take all the things that we had learned along the way and bring it back to Halifax. I like that people walk in and they say that they feel comfortable in the space, and we're lucky enough to have, you know, an amazing bar team and amazing floor staff. And I don't know, we wanted to kind of offer a place where people can just go and chill, and if they want to have a cocktail, great. They want to have a really good spirit, great. They want to have a beer, great. Like, we wanted a program that was strong on all fronts. Cool. We didn't want a 25 cocktail menu. Yeah. We wanted like 12 drinks so we can flip off weekly. Cool.
Still burning down my coast, so I'll give you a second.
So I guess this is probably where we have to kind of cut it off. but I just want to say that, thank you very much to everyone here. There is so much we could probably still cover in terms of the history of the cocktail in Halifax. I want to thank everyone who came out. I think this is, the number of people in here is amazing. That you guys gave up your time on a Sunday to come listen to, the history of bartending. So I just want to say thank you to you guys, and thank you to you guys for coming out. Does anyone, just kind of wrap up, does anyone have any final questions for anyone?
A little bit more. I came from over like yourself, so I probably would say the same script, but hotspot. But where can I change my roles? When I was here for recording engineering for school, coming across Jose with Jenner there. With your Jenner basis script, I kind of opened a lot of doors for myself. And then the other door that opened up was Jenner's Most Food, kind of like the pairing with the food and the cocktails. That's kind of changed a lot of things in both my direction in a different place. Aside from like recording rights, my original school brought me out here, so I'm still in Halifax enjoying the scene because of the people that do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I have to say
Sick
that
hat.
it's funny that Neil would say that, because one place that I forgot to mention that I worked was this restaurant called Nectar in Dartmouth, and it was the very first bar in Dartmouth trying to do cocktails, and albeit way ahead of its time, which led to its unfortunate demise. But I went from being a shooter girl to learning from Neil. Neil taught me how to make a mojito. Like, I strained my mojito the first time I ever made one, and Neil was like, oh God, no, let me show you how to do this. And so I think that there's all these, like, I'm very, very lucky and humbled to be sitting on this panel with these guys up here. But there are a lot of people who play like little pieces in your life along the way. And
Tons,
so
yeah.
the same way Neil
There,
says
there
that
could have
to-
been 10 people on this
Exactly.
panel.
Got me
15.
with single malts, man. Sitting at Tom's all night.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jenner,
man,
Jenner,
seriously,
yeah. Jenner,
Crusher, man. Like,
I applied to Tom's 5
actually-
times.
I'm gonna hype Crusher up. I'm gonna hype Crusher up right now. Who we should have a chair for Crusher,
Yeah.
actually. But here's a testament to a true professional bartender. If anyone doesn't know Steve Cross, on your way out, give him a hug and a kiss.
Go sit at his bar.
This city is full of bartenders that had that nice tavern job, making okay bucks, and then cocktail culture comes and they're like, And the original Seahorse was badass, and it was next door. And I would go down and see Steve Cross, and almost initially, Hell's Bells would come on, and that was his joint. And it was beers, rum and cokes and shooters, and he was the man. And then he and I opened up Ale House together, Halifax Ale House together. And then cocktails come. Now he could have, like everyone else, just been like, I'm cool, I'm in pubs. But he challenged himself to learn an entirely different craft in his same industry, and now is managing 2 places, or he's a leader in his industry and he leads a team. So you're 100% right. Like, it's not just us up here. It's not just a small group. It's many small people.
It's everyone.
And that do a huge amount of effort day in and day out. And like I think the overall story, or the overall lesson you can learn from the story we try to tell, is in the dog days of November and March, when business isn't that great, and you still, you're still out there prepping and bartending and making cocktails for 3 people some nights during a snowstorm, trust in yourself that you're doing God's work. Like, you're doing the right thing, you're doing it the right way, and it matters, because someone's going to walk into your bar one day and try your syrup, and it's going to change his life. You never know who's going to walk in. You never know who you're going to be serving. You never know that one cocktail that could just like hit that light bulb, and then
It's over.
boom,
Yeah.
right? So it really, really, it sounds trivial, and it's important to be humble about it, but it's also really important. People come into bars to escape their own stressful realities, and they hand you over their hard-earned money to put something in their body that's alcoholic.
It's
Doesn't eat a
intimate.
sandwich, right? So it's a very intimate and a very huge responsibility we have, and you should not take it lightly. And the best ones don't take it lightly, right? So just everyone give themselves a pat on the back if you're a professional bartender, because it's not easy, and it's very much misunderstood and underappreciated, but it's only getting better, and it's only growing. It's only, the sky's the limit. In 2007, when we opened Mosaic, the desolate environment that we opened up in, to now, right? Imagine where we're going to be in another 8 years. I mean, I judged the Made with Love competition 2 weeks ago. If we had the Made with Love competition 11 years ago, it'd be me and Jeff in a room making drinks for me and Jeff. And now there's 300 people that show up at that place, 18 bartenders who would have qualified to be in that competition, right? So we're in a really good place.
I think that's a good way to wrap up. Thank you so much,
Can I
guys.
just say one thing before
Yes.
we finish? I just want to say, for me, obviously I'm very inspired by history. We had in 1749 the very first ever license given out to a pub, which is the Split Crow, still in operation. In Chester, 1764, you've got the oldest continuous pub in Nova Scotia. We have such a huge tradition of it here. And so all of you in this room are part of that living history, and all of us up here. We told a very, very small story today about a larger picture of bartending. But all of you here today are carrying that forward. And so it's not us, it's everything, and it's everyone. So I want to thank Evan for putting this on, all of these guys and girls for being
Thank you
out.
guys for coming. Thank you. I'm not as nervous now. Thank you. All right. That's it.
Let's do this again. That was
Yeah, let's
fun.
do it again soon. Thanks, guys.
Tip your bartenders.
I gotta hit the fucking loo like you wouldn't believe. Jesus.